This is Barry with Cruising Authority at cruisetalkshow.com. I'm in Stockholm, Sweden, and I'm visiting the amazing Vasa Museum. This particular special edition of Cruising Authority has been brought to you by Borton Overseas at www.bortonoverseas.com and Stein Tours. If you're ever visiting Stockholm, make sure you contact Stein Tours for customized, very specialized tours of Stockholm. Now let's go on with our tour of the Vasa Museum. The moment you step into the Vasa Museum in Stockholm, it would be difficult to not be impressed with this giant wooden ship as the centerpiece. The Vasa was built in 1628 as a royal ship of war commissioned by the king, and on its maiden voyage, only a short distance from the shipyard in the Stockholm harbor, on a clear, beautiful day, the Vasa caught its first wind and immediately listed too far. Cannon ports were open and ocean water poured into the ship. The Vasa quickly capsized and sank with a loss of about 50 people who drowned. For 333 years, the Vasa remained remarkably preserved at the bottom of the harbor, and in 1961, the massive and ancient ship was raised to the surface. It was an epic project to raise this ship from the mud, and for many years the hull was continuously sprayed with a mist of water to preserve the wood. Let's go now to an interview I did with the Director of Archaeological Research, who can tell us more about the preservation challenges they've had. Well, I have the wonderful privilege of speaking with Fred Hawker. Fred, what is your position here at the museum?
I'm the Director of Archaeological Research. I'm responsible for studying the ship.
Now, I wanted to ask you some interesting questions here about, for example, the ventilation of the ship. How are you preserving the interior?
Well, actually, the climate inside the museum is just about the most important thing we can do to preserve the ship. We have to keep a stable temperature and humidity, and so we have a system that was installed only about 7 years ago that creates an envelope of conditioned air around the ship, compensates for all of the humidity that comes in with visitors, pretty much compensates for all the seasonal fluctuation. And that consists of these big intakes that you can see under the ship, sucking air in, goes to a central climate plant, and then it comes back in both in plumes of air sprayed or dumped over the ship, and then there are hoses that go into the ship that provide air circulation in the interior, so we can maintain the same temperature, the same humidity inside and outside all day long, all year round.
Now, I understand you've had some challenges with the iron bolts that were originally, used in the construction of the ship.
That's correct. The ship was assembled, the main structure is held together with wooden pegs called trunnels, but the reinforcing structure and the decks are held to the rest of the hull with iron bolts that are about 1 inch in diameter, up to 2 meters long, and there were about 8,000 of them originally. Many tons of iron. That disappeared completely while the ship was on the bottom, and those bolts turned into rust that's now permeated out into the wood. That's not good for the ship. It's a catalyst for all sorts of bad reactions. Those bolts were replaced in the 1960s, but they replaced them with mild steel, and it's rusting. And so we now have to replace those mild steel bolts that are now 45 years old with a more stable material. And we'll replace those with a high-grade stainless steel made especially for the ship in cooperation with our partner in this, which is the Sandvik steel mill.
Now, I understand also that the ship is distorting from its own weight after all these years. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's correct. One of the reasons the ship survived so long is it's very heavily built. And that was great for when it was on the bottom of the harbor. It's not so great now that it's started to dry out. It's lost a significant portion of the original strength that the wood had. And it still has quite a lot of strength. We can walk around in it to work on it. But it can't support its own weight in the long term without crushing itself. And so what we need to do is develop a new support structure for the ship that will match the distribution of weight in the ship and lift some of the weight of the deck structure off of the sides of the hull.
So when do you anticipate you'll be able to put these new supports in?
Well, we've actually started with the bolting project. We've started replacing the bolts, and we have about 6,000 of those to change altogether. We hope to change about 1,000 of those this year into next year as a pilot project, and then go from there. That will take several years. The process of designing a new support cradle for the ship is very complex, and the first stage of that is a complete documentation of the ship to understand how it functions as a structure. And that phase, the documentation phase of the structure itself, will be completed this year. Drawing up and analyzing that data will be next year, 2012. And then from that point, we can begin to design the new cradle elements and start fitting those at some point in the future. There's a lot of fundraising has to be done before we get to that stage, though.
I'm sure. It sounds like a tremendous project. One last question. Tell us about the special polymer or whatever the material was that you used to fill in where the water was in the wood.
Right. If wood becomes waterlogged, it dissolves some of the material inside the cells of the wood, which is what causes the loss of strength. And you have to replace that lost material and the water that's now in the cells with something that will harden and restore some of the mechanical strength. In the past, people used all sorts of materials, from creosote to glycerin to alum. In the 1950s, the wood industry here in Sweden developed a new chemical for stabilizing wood for commercial purposes called polyethylene glycol. It's effectively a water-soluble synthetic wax. And it's used in the wood industry still, although its most common use nowadays is as a food and cosmetics additive. It's present in almost all shampoos, chapstick, that sort of thing. But it will penetrate into the wood, and then as the wood dries, it hardens and restores some of the lost mechanical strength and bulks out the wood cells. Vasa was the first shipwreck to be treated with that material, and it's since gone on to become more or less the standard treatment for large waterlogged wooden objects like ships.
Well, Fred, it really was a pleasure. I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for being on Cruising Authority.
My pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your journey.
I was amazed by how ornate and colorful the ship was when she was first constructed, and the museum has done a fantastic job of restoring many of the fittings and recreating pieces that were lost so we can see a more complete picture of what the ship used to look like. I also spoke with the marketing manager at the Vasa Museum. Let's go now to that interview. I'm here with Matthias, the marketing manager. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Now, tell us a little bit about the history of the Vasa.
The Vasa was built in 1626 to 1628, and she was designed to be the most powerful warship of the Swedish Navy at that time. Unfortunately, she didn't sail very far. She sank on a maiden voyage after less than 20 minutes of sailing, still being in the harbour of Stockholm. She remained underwater for 333 years, almost forgotten, and then in the late 50s and early 60s she was discovered and raised.
So there's a 50-year celebration that you have just come up to here. What happened during that celebration?
We present a lot of new facts in the museum because it's still an ongoing research project, and it has been presented in 2 new books. We opened a new exhibition, and we also hosted a huge gala dinner where we invited all those people who were taking part in the racing of the ship 50 years ago. So it was like a very nice reunion with divers and media representatives and everybody that in some way helped us to race the Vasa.
So people that come to Scandinavia and come to Sweden and Stockholm particularly really should come out here to see this. Why is that?
The Vasa is unique. It's the only ship of its kind. You can't find anything like this anywhere else in the world because of the unique conditions in the Baltic Sea. And also I think the design of the museum and the experience with the architecture is just an overwhelming experience. And I think you're quite breathtaking by the view when you enter the museum.
It truly is amazing when you first enter the doors here and see this massive ship. It really is a special experience. Thank you so much for talking with us here at Cruising Authority.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for joining us on this very special program featuring the Vasa Museum in Stockholm, Sweden. Our sponsors again for this particular program are Borton Overseas, So if you're ever wanting to go on any kind of a Scandinavian adventure or journey or voyage, make sure you contact Borton Overseas at www.bortonoverseas.com. Also, if you're ever in Stockholm, you have to visit the Vasa Museum, and one of the tour operators here is Stein Tours. They are probably one of the best tour operators in the Stockholm area. So make sure you contact Stein Tours when you come to Stockholm. Again, this has been a special program of Cruising Authority. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, I want to wish you smooth seas.